Hey everyone, and welcome back to the library and our very first book club video. I'm Haley. I am a librarian at a university, but literature was not actually my field. I was not an English lit major. I actually focused on tech and design with my graduate degrees in journalism and media studies, so pop culture, TV, film. So this book club is more about reading interesting titles, learning, for more informed people what they have to say through library research, and just sharing some gut reactions. Super low pressure, gonna be fun and cozy. And you can always join by reading along and then commenting your thoughts, ideas for future books, factoids as we go. Now, I was all geared up to do kind of this deep dive on 1984 from George Orwell, but as I actually started reading through the prologue and doing a little research, I realized that I would be missing something, important by skipping ahead like that. And so to kind of, before I could really get into that world of Big Brother, I had to go to the farm, the most dysfunctional farm ever. That's right. Before 1984 was a smash hit, George Orwell had his classic Animal Farm. It's pretty short, it's savage, and it was the perfect setup for kind of understanding, I think, the mindset going into 1984. So today I'm going to talk a bit about what I found about him as an author, some historical context to the situation, and then what I found in this, kind of little book, with some gut reactions and questions for you at the end. So let's get into it. First, who was George Orwell? First, I learned that it wasn't even his real name. And I learned that from reading kind of the bio, which was the very, very, very first pages of the books. A lot of times we end up skipping over the opening author bio and copyright info, but there actually can be some pretty interesting facts and content on those pages. So I learned, right, that he was actually born Eric Arthur Blair in 1903 in British India. Now, I didn't really know what was happening in British India in the 1900s, and so I kind of wanted to understand potentially his early life experiences that could have shaped those stories. And so when looking into it, what I found really a system of super centralized, administration by the British Empire in that kind of colonial space. And they had a lot of problems with like law and order. So they had these sort of central officers, but those officers didn't have a lot of practical training in the people, languages, religions, like customs or the area at large. They just didn't really know like the vibes of the area. So based on this kind of publication about this guy, Henry Dobbs, who was basically like an officer in the area, giving like firsthand accounts and stuff, he handled and saw a lot of police bribery. And so that's kind of a little bit of the context that I picked up. But please, if you know a lot more about, that history, you have some favorite sources, or maybe, you have family members that, pass down stories that maybe lived through partition, I definitely want to know. Because I just did a cursory kind of research overview, just because I was like, I really have no idea what was going on in British India at that time. But as I was reading more, I don't think he necessarily actually grew up there anyway. I also read some stuff that he grew up in England while his father remained working in India, so Orwell probably heard more secondhand stories about it anyway. So according to this bio, kind of in the book, after school, Orwell joined the Imperial Police in Burma, and then he also served in the Spanish Civil War that was happening between like World War I and World War II. Looking into that a little bit, it was a lot of tactics for surveillance and public, punishment used to control folks, which are themes that definitely show up pretty explicitly in Animal Farm. Now, Time Magazine published an article, The Year It's Almost Here, in 1983 about 1984. We'll talk a lot more about that source in the next video when we actually break down 1984. But basically, the author went into quite a bit of detail about how much, like, his time in Burma and Spain, it seemed like impacted Orwell. Now, Orwell died in 1950, so, this article didn't use him as a primary interview source. Instead, sort of Times kind of tracked down Orwell's writings and political essays and like journalistic work and interviews to kind of put that together. So it seems like, what he witnessed and saw was a lot of chaos. He saw some shit. He lived through World War II as well. And specifically how like propaganda could be used to crush, your political rivals, and how a revolution could so easily be sort of corrupted, even after victory. It's like,
that's a non-starter. Winning was easy, young man. Governing's hard.
We won. That's almost the easy part. And now you have to actually lead, which is, a different type of challenge. And of course, we also even see that in, series like Star Wars.
Hello there.
Where kind of a theme, especially as we get into like the new era and age, where it's like, okay, winning is one thing. Now leading is another thing. And, how different forms of rebellion can keep sort of popping up here and there. So definitely a persisting kind of everlasting theme that seems to run through both of those books and through our stories today. So Orwell likely witnessed and lots of that kind of chaotic fighting in Spain. Of course, lived through World War II. And so he was thinking a lot about kind of that propaganda engine and revolutionary corruption. Animal Farm was published in 1946, and publishers were pretty nervous about actually running it because the Soviet Union was an ally in World War II, and this book was definitely considered an anti-Soviet parody and commentary on socialism and how it's kind of bound to make things worse for people. Though after reading it, I felt like I picked up, yes, on that. It's definitely there, and how challenging it is to have sort of truly equal labor sharing. The animals really didn't last very long before it kind of turned into what I read. It's much more of like a late stage capitalism problem that we see today, where, like management and brain work, the sort of owners over the means of production, just start, exploiting the laborers in that production, and how sort of that drive to benefit a small population, that kind of see themselves as like, the sort of more equal than others, right? A big quote that will come up, and kind of the better. The pigs think that they are literally better than everyone. And it's not a perfect kind of allegory, because of course the pigs are smarter than all the other animals.
Yeah, sure, okay.
But they really exploit that, which feels more like a capitalist critique and problem. So what actually happens on the farm? Let's talk more about that. So for the story itself, Animal Farm is that allegory. The story of these talking animals, it then makes really clear, easy points about real world events. Most kind of literary scholars I was scrolling through were pointing more towards like the Russian Revolution, not the Spanish Civil War, but that's the thing with allegories, they can be applied to a lot of different situations. And I was really drawn to media studies because any story, book, film, song, TV, like ones you make up in your head, something that your friend tells you, are chances where we actually process kind of the world and our lives. Now, I first read Animal Farm in middle school, maybe a little bit younger. Either way, it was a very long time ago. And I actually did grow up on a farm of sorts. Like, it did have pigs and horses and a cow and a goat and dogs and cats, all these animals. My friends had sheep. So a lot of the distinctions between the animal roles and their intelligence touched on in the book was interesting for me. Like, my pigs were definitely pretty smart. The sheep are pretty dumb animals. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So let's start on Manor Farms, ran by this guy, Mr. Jones. He's not a super great farmer. The animals talk a lot about not being warm enough, not getting enough food. And so the story pretty much immediately kicks in with Old Major, this old ass, like, boss of a boar, bringing everybody together and sharing his dream of sort of a human-free world where the animals would work for themselves, called animalism. His dream was they become the owners of production and actually have control over the means and the outcomes of their labor. And they are taught this song, The Beast of England. I had no idea how to make that tune work. Like, I did not know how to sing that song. My brain does not work that way. So here is a clip from the 1950s movie and what they interpreted it to be. Okay, so now at this point, I actually decided to make a character map, which is just a little technique to keep track of, all the names and the arcs going on. So Old Major dies pretty much right after that, and the remaining pigs kind of step up to organize this rebellion. The animals do successfully kick Mr. Jones out of the farm because he is again super-faced and forgot to feed them as sort of this final angry straw. They rename the place Animal Farm and paint their 7 commandments on the barn wall. And the pigs also taught themselves to read and write kind of in the background. Now, the various other animals are different levels of literate, which becomes really important to the propaganda piece of it. So, spoilers, it is a lot easier to control a group when they can't read because our memory and just our ability to organize is really undermined in that case. And that is one factor why our system of chattel enslavement was so effective for so long, because it was super illegal for enslaved Black Americans to be literate. I mean, so much so that they would even punish owners and white folks for trying to teach sort of Black folks to read. And when you think about it for half a second, that reason and that system makes a lot of sense. It's obviously a lot harder to do things like escape or organize a rebellion or a protest or do anything when you literally can't read, what is going on around you, and sort of the resources that are available. And so, having that kind of illiterate body is definitely one reason why the pigs so easily, with basically no resistance, were able to take over, because all the animals who couldn't read were basically oh, I guess I read it wrong, or I guess I remembered wrong, because our memory is, extremely easy to, just manipulate, and not even in always bad ways, just generally, we misremember things all the time. And, it's not that hard to sort of inception ideas into our brains. And it's a little harder to do that when, things are written and you can really read it and commit it in text sort of that way. And today, you likely have read stories or seen, threads, tweets, whatever, really sounding the alarm about our decreasing literacy rates in society and our reading rates going down. Good thing that we have a book club, but, that's, kind of speaking to why, as a society, we are reading a lot less. And when we are reading, we're not maybe thinking about it quite as much. And yeah, I mean, these are some of the hallmarks that people keep pointing back to that makes them concerned, just from what we've learned in the past, and how that might be, setting up potential kind of futures and concerns. Okay, back to the farm. So the pigs, they wrote these principles on this barn wall, whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. And their most important one of all animals are equal. Great, love it, simple, let's do it. And for a little while, the farm actually follows that and is thriving. Everyone is super productive because they know their labor goes directly to them, back to their community. Things are looking good. Snowball is setting up committees. I love a committee, and trying to design this windmill to modernize the farm. But Napoleon isn't as interested in those committees, and he's actually been raising a litter of puppies in his own private, loyal to him security force. These puppies basically get disappeared right after they're born, and everyone just forgets that they exist, basically. And I think this definitely speaks to the dangers of gatekeeping education and having a lack of transparency, wider socialization, singular authority, on impressionable young beings. At least that's what I honestly thought of when Napoleon was, kind of deciding that he alone was the only one capable of educating not just the puppies, but also new pigs are born and kind of all these new animals. He really focuses on being the educator and instilling right from the start sort of his version of, or what would become, right, his ideals and values of animalism, rather than kind of allowing the rest of the community to offer, even more experiences, perspectives. Nobody really knows what he's teaching them as well, because he does it all very much behind closed doors. And then it's too late, right? The puppies grow up and now they are only listening to him, only loyal to him, seem to only be able to communicate with him. Unlike the other animals, these puppies don't talk to anyone else, and he uses just lots of whistles and sounds. So that's kind of an interesting thing. It seems like there's something there. Let me know what you maybe thought of when you were reading that sequence. But yeah, it is interesting that like they aren't the only animals that don't talk, but it is established early that the dogs, are on the more clever side and like learned how to read better than the other animals. And so I don't really know why the puppies don't talk and use words like all the other animals do. Yeah, I don't know. It's almost like they actually have regressed to being kind of more like normal dogs and sort of fall out of the sort of fantasy allegory here. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing. Let me know what you think about the dogs, though. So the conflict really comes to a head. Napoleon like unleashes his dogs on Snowball, super rude, right when he was about to like win basically this vote from all the animals to build the windmill. And Napoleon doesn't want to build the windmill for reasons. I didn't really understand why he was against it, because later he gets actually super obsessed with building it and then rebuilding it and then rebuilding it. Literally goes on for years. But anyway, Napoleon chases Snowball off, literally seizes control, starts to do things like cancel all of the meetings and make the animals, kind of march around in these parades, and just slowly, actually as a trickle over literal years, actually in the book, like erodes their more like democratic, let's figure this out as a group, and instead basically appoints just a committee of only pigs who are the only ones making decisions, and really just starts like issuing out the orders and then taking, right, a lot more of, what is produced sort of for themselves, more milk, more eggs, more of the like apples from the apple harvest all end up going just to the pigs, under this sort of guise and premise that the pigs need it because of their, big brains, and because it's so hard to be the manager and run the farm. And so they need all these extra things that the laboring animals don't. But the laboring animals just kind of accept it like, oh yeah, you must be working really hard. Like, sure. Even though there's definitely like little bits of discontentment and grumbling happening, nobody really necessarily speaks up. Outside of some chickens who try to do a little kind of mini rebellion when Napoleon decides that they need to have even like take more eggs to eat and then sell. But it doesn't last very long because he basically withdraws food. And a bunch of the chickens die from starvation, and then finally just give up and like give him their eggs. So it's definitely not great under Napoleon's reign and regime. And of course, this book is only 98 pages long, so it does happen quickly, to us as the reader, but it is like, over at least a few different seasons, kind of multiple years before things truly get very kind of authoritarian and grim for all of the animals. But all of this does kind of happen fast enough that the animals aren't really thinking about what is happening too much. And his special committee just kind of keeps running things and making all of those decisions. So Squealer, his sort of PR person, gets to work constantly convincing everyone that things like Snowball was actually a traitor right from the very beginning, and that Napoleon was the true hero. They literally start rewriting through that oral storytelling tradition that things like the Battle of the Cowshed, that all the animals remember as Snowball leading the charge. By the end of the book, it's that memory has basically turned on its head, and now Snowball is actually leading the enemy charge and actively fighting against the other animals as a spy for Mr. Jones. And reading it made me feel like a little crazy and just overall upset at all the animals. But remember, and this was actually over years, whereas I read it, in an afternoon. And some of the animals, like the horses, do give some side eye at this rewriting and know it's not quite going on, but ultimately decide like their memory must be wrong. Only the donkey, Benjamin, seems to really fully clock what's happening. But he never really speaks up about it because he's just super kind of nihilist, really, about the whole thing. And that suffering and just life being shitty and somebody owning you and in control is like an inevitable. So he definitely, like Benjamin, he definitely knows what's happening, but he doesn't do anything necessarily to stop it. Because he's not like really that directly impacted most of the time. He's honestly just kind of chilling, being like, okay, which I think also is a stand-in for a lot I think a lot of people could kind of identify with that position of like, yeah, this is bad. I see this, but like, what am I going to do about it? And like, I definitely understand and kind of resonate with that sentiment from Benjamin as well. So from there, life on the farm gets progressively worse constantly for everyone who isn't a pig, basically, though even the pigs aren't fully safe. The pigs move into the farmhouse. They sleep in the beds. They trade with the next door farms. And every time they break one of those original 7 commandments, Squealer like secretly repaints the barn wall at night to change the rule. So for example, like no animal shall sleep in a bed turned into no animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets. And because most of those animals are very literate, they all just assume or believe that they misremembered or like misread the like original commandment, and this is clearly what it's always been, except Benjamin. But again, doesn't stand up, doesn't do anything, doesn't push the issue, even though he definitely knows what's going on. And as a like comms person, technical writer, I definitely felt those moments because what is written is typically viewed as stronger or like more official than what is spoken, as oral traditions of storytelling and like verbal agreements does tend to be kind of like devalued. And so, like, as a professor in strategic and business comms, we would spend actually a lot of time working on, like, why documentation, project closeouts, meeting minutes, scope of work agreements are so important. Because I mean, it is just generally easier to, like, break a verbal agreement than, when it's right there kind of in writing as evidence. So all that's happening towards the end of the book, we're almost there. The most loyal and hardworking animal, this horse named Boxer. It's so sad. His motto is always, I will work harder, then works himself to death, basically. Once he collapses, Napoleon like tells everyone that he's sending him to the hospital, but it's actually just like a glue factory. And it was so extra sad because Boxer like talked a lot about how he was excited for the retirement pasture and like setting up the rest of the farm for success once he retired. And if Benjamin, the donkey, would like be able to hang out with him in retirement. And it's actually Benjamin, the donkey, who was able to read on the side of the truck that, hey, this is actually like a slaughterhouse truck, but it was, too late to save Boxer. And it really reminded me of that quote, right? When they came for me, there was no one left to speak. Because Benjamin didn't speak up all these other times when the pigs harassed the chickens for those eggs. He didn't speak up when they moved into the house. He didn't speak up when they rewrote all those commandments. He didn't speak up when they literally butchered a whole series of animals as like traitors. But then when they came and the pigs took his best friend Boxer away, and it was time to finally like stand up and speak up, like nothing could be done because we'd already sort of let them take control and all of those other steps further. And now it was directly impacting Benjamin, and he's trying to like speak up, but it's just like too late. Boxer is already in the truck, already down the driveway, and they never saw Boxer again. And mysteriously, the pigs got money for a new box of whiskey after Boxer died in the hospital. Literally so sad. That was like one of the worst parts of this overall very like savage, hurtful book. I was really torn up about that. Poor Boxer. Poor Boxer. So we get to the end, right? And the story basically ends with the pigs are walking on 2 legs with this new saying going around of like 4 legs good, 2 legs better. They're wearing clothes and they're carrying whips. Those 7 commandments are gone, just like painted over and replaced with the single phrase, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And the other animals, who are just like really confused and sort of beaten down at this point, peer into the farmhouse window and they see the pigs playing like cards and drinking with the neighboring human farmers. And then they realize that they no longer can even tell the difference between the pigs and the man. So, the revolution has come full circle at this point. The new bosses are exactly the same as the old bosses. And these like lower animals are just back to being the same undervalued means of production that ultimately only benefits the owners with their labor kind of not really getting, paid or like contributed in a fair way. But the pigs set themselves up to say like, no, nothing's wrong. Like we are being fair because the commandment is some animals are more equal than others. So it actually is fair that we benefit more from these means of production. Yikes. Yikes, yikes, yikes. So that is the plot of Animal Farm. It was upsetting because I do tend to like transport pretty easily and heavily into stories. That is one reason why I really love and chose media studies, to kind of understand basically why every like book and commercial and movie made me like cry or like hit me so hard. So I definitely did feel myself like, oh, like being, Boxer and being like so sad about it. And just, it definitely is a very, I felt like it's not a challenging book in terms of understanding what is going on, I don't think. I feel like it's pretty on the nose, pretty like straightforward and obvious kind of what is happening, the warning signs, all these moments where the animals, it was like, no, don't you see what's happening? Can't you, stand up and stop it? But then also it's important and speaks to like, yeah, even if you know what's happening, often like we can't, or we feel like we can't, or we literally, can't necessarily stop it or like speak up or anything like that. So there's definitely a lot to just like ponder that could be learned from it. But I think kind of those biggest, most obvious kind of tells is like, one, do trust your experience, trust your knowledge, trust your memory, because people can super easily sort of falsify these records, and then that record becomes the new memory. And so, finding ways to preserve what you know happened or what you know to be true whenever we can does definitely feel like an important strategy to keep in mind, right? Don't isolate ourselves. Part of this problem is the pigs were able to go interact with the outside and neighboring farms, whereas none of the other animals were like ever left the farm or ever even allowed to talk to the outside. And so the more isolated we become, the easier it is for like leaders to kind of take over and start exploiting and taking advantage of us. And then, I think also really the biggest thing with the ending, just being that, power sort of corrupts.
Thank you, Doctor. I was able to gather the meaning. It also proves another saying. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
And what did start out, all the pigs, even Napoleon started out, kind of really being for animalism and helping the farm. But again, by the end, it's like he was able to get away with all these little elements of power, kind of starting with mixing some extra milk into kind of his own mash, and nobody spoke up and they let him get away with that. And then it just kind of grew and grew, and he kept pushing the boundaries and the limits and kept getting away with it until, again, he just turned into the original owner. He took kind of all that greed and that power, and again, the comfort that really comes with being in those again, owners of production kind of relationship. And it's like, yeah, why would he work hard when he can just force everybody else to work hard and like reap all the benefits? I think that is a pretty common, even like natural inclination for a lot of people. And yeah, this book is pretty exacting, and like, don't root for the pigs. They're clearly pretty bad in this situation. Empathize, with the other animals and what they're going through. And yeah, there's some it's just like a pretty clear-cut thing. So I am definitely interested in what you have to say. So I do have some like lingering questions that I would really love to see your comments on, or, go over and find me on Threads, chat with me there. Because I would love to, know kind of what you were thinking when you kind of read back through Animal Farm and just what stood out to you. So, two kind of lingering questions and moments that I just want you to think about and give me your answers to. So first, which animal in the book did you like sympathize with, or just find the most kind of stuck in your brain interesting, and why? And so for me, I actually found myself really stuck on Molly, the show pony. So Molly on the surface is kind of like the surface level vain mare. And in my kind of light researching, it definitely seems like most of the commentary sort of has Molly as a stand-in for, what happens when you like prioritize personal comfort and luxury over the revolution. And like, yes, she is not super down with the revolution and pretty happy with farm life as it is. She gets ribbon and sugar and like likes driving the cart around. Honestly, go queen. But she then actually chooses to leave the farm. She like definitely doesn't help out at all and is like kind of the worst for sure while she is on the farm, like doesn't pull her weight, doesn't actually, work or contribute labor in like an equitable, fair, way. She has a horse, she could do a lot of work, but she just like dips out on it. And that is, bad. And definitely that kind of reading of her is this like vain, surface level, like the epitome of sort of what is wrong with society when we get too caught up on superficial things, and like for sure. But then I'm just like a little bit stuck on where her story ends up and sort of what Orwell maybe was trying to say, or like what we could read from the story afterwards, or like knowing how everything turned out. Because yeah, she leaves the farm kind of like fairly quickly. I don't wanna do this anymore. Kind of, and was seen later like pretty happy, like pulling a cart for a new owner with a bunch of like new ribbons and sugar and stuff. And so now if Animal Farm didn't spiral into that like horrible, possibly worse conditions, then that message of like labor value and luxury as like intention with kind of egalitarian order, I think would work better. But I'm just really stuck on Molly leaving because it was a good choice. Like her decision to look out for her individual interests. And she wanted this life, right? Where she, yeah, so, she was now, re-enslaved or re-oppressed by working for people. But all the other animals ended up being oppressed and enslaved by staying with the pigs. So in the end, it's like, I mean, did Molly really make that bad of a decision? She kind of chose what her conditions would be rather than just waiting for them to be thrust upon her. And she seems just like generally fine and happy with that lifestyle. So it just kind of becomes like a little bit muddled or kind of funny for me. Especially since, right, she chose kind of her personal interests and freedom in that way by only oppressing herself, basically. She didn't drag all these other like animals into it once she left the farm. Whereas the pigs obviously pursued their individual like needs and interests, but they did it through the like oppression and labor of the other animals. And that's obviously bad. So yeah, I guess I don't really know what Orwell was trying to say with Molly the horse, or what like moral or message I'm exactly supposed to be taking out of it. So I definitely have to hear if you have any thoughts about Molly the horse. But then of course any other animal that, or narrative arc or like moment that really stood out to you. Oh, I forgot my coffee. Got my hot chocolate, always good for a book club. So, the other question, right? Animal Farm obviously is a book about what goes on with the revolution. So, what like specific warnings stood out to you as like most important, and like what do you think we will see show up in 1984 that was like foreshadowed or hinted at in Animal Farm? But last, before we sign off, did you know there's a new Animal Farm movie being released in January 2026? Has a bunch of people, Joe Rogan, no, not Joe Rogan, Seth Rogen, Kieran Culkin is in it. It's directed by Andy freaking Serkis. So I think we might have to do a little movie club, perhaps a double feature with the original from 1954. That could be kind of maybe fun, looking forward. So, yeah, keep that in mind. Now you've read the book in January. Let's follow up with what the movie adaptation has to say and ends up being like. But back to the main point of our actual October book club is 1984. I went off on this Animal Farm side quest because it was just so heavily featured in the foreword of my 75th anniversary edition of 1984. So go ahead and finish your read of this book, pull out your favorite quotes, themes, characters, reactions, and in the next videos at the end of October, we'll talk about 1984. I'm excited. And for now, that is the story. Thank you for joining me, my library fellows. Stay curious, get to reading, and I'll see you in our next book club in the library.